welcome back to the Two Pointers Podcast. I'm Trevor Everett, and if you can tell by my extra level of excitement, it seems, as you heard in the intro, there's a reason for it, the sound of that sweet, sweet CBS March Madness music. We are here for the 2024 Two Pointers Podcast March Madness Bracket Show. I'm super excited to be bringing you guys this. This is my third show in 3 days, so obviously I would love to have had it out a little earlier, but I sat on some of these picks. I stewed a little bit. You'll see my final four picks at the end, but I also changed a little bit of a few things. If you tuned in Sunday with House of College Hoops, we had over 900 people concurrently throughout the night. That was really, really awesome to see. Thank you guys so much for the support on that if you were there. Monday, ECB, we did a live stream yesterday, 5 p.m., normal start time on our Sunday, and in this case Monday, reacting to each bracket, giving our final four picks, or each region in the bracket. We had over 500 people, so super excited there. Thank you guys so much for the support. Here is me officially predicting my picks throughout the tournament. This is me picking every single pick technically, because I just want to give a full breakdown. It's a little bit easier, a little bit different than me just showing you, flashing the bracket on the screen. Shout out to Will for making the House of College Hoops 2024 bracket, brought to you by our partners at Rhythm. But obviously that's in pen, and you can hear the ruffle of the paper and can't see actually what I'm going to say until I go to talk about it. There's definitely a few things I'm still deciding on, even up until this moment, as you might have seen when I flipped it over there. But it's decided. I have my final four, kind of sort of revealed it there. Before we jump into it, just remember, SeatGeek is the presenting sponsor of the Two Pointers Podcast. Code 2Pointers, TWOPOINTERS, earns you $20 off your first purchase. So if you're heading to any of these March Madness games, whether you're in Dayton, where the game's a little bit more affordable, or you're in your city like Charlotte or Brooklyn or Omaha or Los Angeles or wherever you are all over the country, you can use code 2Pointers to get $20 off your first purchase. SeatGeek.com. SeatGeek's really great, so you'll know you're getting a really great deal. If you take a look in that venue, maybe it's new to you, maybe you haven't been for a March Madness game, and you're like, "Is this a good seat?" They'll give you a deal score on a scale of 1 to 10, rating you on seat, value, seat view, and things like that as well. So you'll know red, yellow, green whether you're getting a good deal. Code 2Pointers one more time. First of all, just so you know that does support the show. It helps create, give me some funds to help create the better content and better stuff for the show. So really, really appreciate the support there. And also thank you to SeatGeek for being the presenting sponsor as always. So as you see on there, the 2024 March Madness Bracket Show, we're going to get into it. At the top, I don't want to spend forever on this, because if you want to hear my better full laid out case and all the other cases, if that makes sense, from others as well, you've got the two shows I previously mentioned. I'll link them in the description below as well. But look, seeding silliness, seeding stupidity. I'm going to go with seeding stupidity. The committee 100% made some mistakes when they seeded this. I can't sit here and defend the fact that there's enough seeding mistakes. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's the worst of all time. I'm not going to. Matt Norlander laid out a great case for that, right? Like, watching it for 20 years, you still obviously can't come up with a concise thing that says this is the worst seeding effort ever. It could be. It definitely could be. Couple of things to lay out. So FAU being an 8 seed, again, I want to preface with an asterisk that I am not a bracketologist. Okay. Do not claim to be. I have friends in the industry and that do that are very, very credible. T3, Dom, JBR. I'm obviously leaving him out. Otter is another one. Jonathan Warner. Again, I'm leaving people out. Dan Vasta. Love to see how Dan turned out this year for this bracket. But my point is those guys are a lot better at bracketology. But seeding can also be obvious to a fan if you just study the resumes and kind of get an idea of what's going on. So just some quick hitters that I thought were crazy. The Mountain West. Just going to say it up front. The Mountain West was absolutely ridiculously underseeded. The committee did not care. They were viewed as a mid-major conference, but got 6 teams in the tournament because they were so strong against each other. There wasn't enough cannibalism of each other, if that makes sense, to deem it necessary to get 5 in. But the issue is that I have a complete problem with New Mexico not being in the tournament. They're 22 in net, and they were going to end up being a team that was left out of the tournament if they didn't win the Mountain West. It's idiotic. It's stupid. They end up being an 11 seed for that. Clemson, unfortunately, got the unfortunate draw there. You get my point. Couple other things of note. FAU being an 8, a lot of people that were credible had them closer to the first 4 out, last 4 in. Even just a little bit safer, maybe just outside of Dayton there, not having to go play in the first part of the tournament. FAU being an 8, a little surprised by. Just going a little bit by region here in the East right now. Duquesne being an 11, I think they just lazily put all the AQs that, VCU would have been there, Duquesne, NC State, Oregon, and I'm missing one. But basically all the 11s were just kind of slotted in and thrown in that spot. So Duquesne being an 11, I'm not as surprised by. Whether we think it's right or not, it is what it is. I think Drake even at 10 felt a little low, but with no Indiana State because of the bid Steelers, I could see that being a possibility. Ultimately, I have no big of a problem there. Iowa State being the 8 overall team or the last 2 seed is ridiculous. They had a better chance to be a 1 seed than they did be the last 8 seed. I get the non-constrict the schedule thing. It needs to stop being overrated, right? I think it needs to be consistent across the board, which I think relative to the teams in this tournament, I think it probably was. But Iowa State's case, if that's what you're holding against them, they're still one of the best teams in the country, and on most of the metrics, right, they're in the top 10 there. At the end of the day, there's no perfect case for a team, but there's the point I'm making about Iowa State is they, there are teams ahead of them, like, say, a North Carolina, right, or even like a Tennessee. Obviously, those are the 2 contentions for the 1 seed. I'm not saying that they could. It's just the unfortunate draw of what Iowa State is. They're top 15 in most metrics. Ultimately, it just shows us the committee does not care about what happens in those championship games on Friday and Saturday, which is irrelevant to me, which is so stupid. Why does beating Houston the way they did not matter? I just don't get it. Iowa State absolutely handled Houston. Houston ends up being a 1 seed, who was probably already a 1 seed 3 weeks before that, which is crazy to think. Not that would have bumped them out of the line. I'm not saying Iowa State still didn't deserve it over Houston, but the point of is they were closer to 1 than they were to the 3, and that's what they ended up getting, which is the lowest 2, which means they have to play in the bracket of death, or whatever we want to call the East, which we'll get to in a second. So just a couple of problems there. In the South, I don't really, Texas A&M was probably closer to the bubble, and they were comfortably in a 9. Thought that was interesting. I don't have any problem with Wisconsin and James Madison. I think James Madison probably should have been higher, but you'd have to make a really convincing case about some of the teams over them. I could see even NC State and James Madison being flopped there. Boise State should have never, again, Mountain West, you're going to hear me talk about that all day today. I apologize, but not really. The Boise State being in the Dayton 10 play-in, by the way, just shows you how ridiculous the bubble was. We had a 10 seed play-in for the first time ever. Colorado, I think it's fine that they got in. I think the resume, there's some arguments. You heard Phil talk about it yesterday on the UCB show. Colorado probably shouldn't have been in. I think it was. I think they're in the right place in the last 4 in. Last couple of things on seeding in the Midwest. We're going to the Midwest. Utah State being an 8 is absolutely asinine. Should have been probably a 6 or even a 7. Gonzaga being a 5 is insane. For a team that was basically out of tournament contention 4 weeks ago, and then they just won, I guess. It is what it is. McNeese being a 12 is correct. Samford, got all that right. Oregon, South Carolina. UVA being in the tournament whatsoever is ridiculous. If there was an ACC team that should have been in instead, it would be Pitt. Obviously, people are going to say Virginia had, non-con, straight the schedule was better. I think Pitt's a tournament team. Jay Billis laid out a really great case on ESPN the other day. Colorado State, I can probably defend the fact that they're probably in the last 4 in. They started off the season really well. They were kind of the hot darling team that kind of got the Mountain West on the national radar, and then they kind of faltered a little bit. Still got probably a best player on the floor scenario there with Isaiah Stevens, and then that's it in the South. Nevada being a 10 is asinine. Dayton actually, I didn't really think about this, but Dayton isn't a 7 seed resume. Dayton's set resume is, if anything, you could flip Nevada and Dayton. I really think you could 7-10, which is why you'll see what I ended up deciding with Nevada there. But interesting case that laid out by, I think it was Greg Waddell this morning of Sleepers Media. Dayton doesn't have a 7 seed case. If anything, they don't have an at-large case at all, but they've got some early wins in the season as well. There's some things that I'd have to sit there and break it down more. This is not the show for that. It is what it is. New Mexico, Clemson. New Mexico got screwed, having to play as an 11 seed. Clemson got screwed having to play New Mexico. So nobody wins in that scenario because of the Mountain West seeding disparity. Alabama, Charleston, I'm fine with. St. Mary's, Grand Canyon. Mississippi State and Michigan State. Mississippi State, I could argue being closer to a 9. Michigan State, I could argue being closer to Dayton. I think that was a little bit ridiculous. So other than that, I probably missed something in there, but to just kind of give you an idea of where some of the seating disparity is. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was the worst ever. I'm just not. But I'm going to tell you that it's definitely something to keep an eye on because this was one of the worst decisions ever, and they should obviously adjust or look at the bid stealer to something that they should improve upon, and the way they handled it was not correct. And look, at the end of the day, we need to figure out a better way to have a committee with a consistent, intelligent people base, whether that's media, bracketologists, ADs that are currently in there, other people in the basketball space, players, coaches. There has to be a fair, concise way for a team of people to put this together. All right, as you'll see on the bottom of the screen, we are going to begin in the East. The East region is going to be where we head to first. We're going to go East, South, Midwest, and West in that order. Relative to KenPom's strength schedule, or KenPom ratings of the teams, the top 4 highest teams in there, that's actually technically considered potentially the order of strength. We'll kind of get into that a little bit today, but just keeping in mind that this is my picks and my picks only. This is the picks that I will be submitting to bracket pools, to contests, to paid entries, to fun ones. Don't forget, the 2 Pointers podcast is having a bracket challenge as well. Feel free to join. The first prize only, gets a free t-shirt or hat from Home Field of their favorite team or of any team they'd like, courtesy of myself. Doesn't come from Home Field. Home Field is not sponsoring this. They are just a really awesome company that I would love to support even more. Home Field, if you'd like to sponsor me, hey, I'm open to talking. So, first prize, 2 Pointers Broadcast Bracket Challenge, in the link in the description below. The only rule I have is your social media name has to be your username. I have to be able to contact you if I don't know who you are based on the name. So, at whatever, and I'll find it if it's on different socials. Last year, the guy didn't claim his prize, didn't want to, which I thought was sad. But he earned it. He won by a significant margin, picked UConn, the whole thing. And, it's unfortunate. It took me like a month and a half to find him, and I ended up finding him through like a TikTok DM or something like that. So, social media name, that's all I asked for. It's 2024 2 Pointers Podcast Bracket Challenge, I believe is the full title name. Link will also be in the description as well. So let's jump into it. UConn and Stetson is the 116. Like I said, I'm going to break down each of these games, each of these picks. I'm not going to go more than an hour as the plan. I want you to be able to hear the reasoning, and we can get rolling into it and debate it in the comments. I'm not going to waste time on ones like this where it's 116, even though I got a chance to interview head coach Donnie Jones of the Stetson Hatters. Incredible coach, incredible guy. Happy for them. Not happy they drew the 116 there with UConn. Poor Stetson there. I'm going to pick UConn. In the 8-9 game, this is where I really came down to, immediately had to think, right? This is the second game if you're going in order, like I just said. And I'm already having to think hard, which most 8-9s you should. With the 8-9 here, I went with FAU. This is a team that I think is getting undervalued. Last year, they were kind of in the same position. They made the Final Four, of course. We knew that was kind of out of nowhere. But to think about this team, they are a really, really deep guard rotation. They are a deep team in general. They play 11, 12 guys pretty consistently. They have an incredible big in Vlad. And I don't particularly – I think they can bottle up Northwestern. Northwestern's missing a few key pieces, and I think this FAU team is underseeded for the talent, obviously seeded properly or a little bit badly based on some of the resume stuff. So I have FAU taking on UConn in the second round. I'll complete all the first round, and then we'll go into the second round, and I'll recap who it is. The 5-12, I think this UAB team is incredible. San Diego State, though, I think is better. I think San Diego State moves on. Number 4, 13. A lot of people are picking Yale. I don't think this is the Ivy League team that would do it against, especially a team like Auburn. If this was Princeton, I'd probably pick Princeton as much as I like this Auburn team. So I have San Diego State taking on Auburn in the round of 32. BYU Duquesne. As much as the cool Duquesne story is, 1977, I believe, last time they made the tournament. Mid-Major Madness had a great time. He was up in Brooklyn for that. Happy for him there as a Duquesne fan, I guess, technically. Some family ties there. I think the Mormons, BYU, whatever you want to call them, I think they're incredible. Can't play on Sunday. I found that out. I thought that was fascinating, which is why they drew the Thursday-Saturday draw as a 6. They would have been a 5, according to the committee, I believe. But I think that is why, let's see, Gonzaga would have been a 6 in this region. But they had to flip them, so I thought that was fascinating. BYU technically a 5, Gonzaga technically a 6, if you have some seeding questions there. I think BYU's incredible offense that spreads it out and shoots a ton of threes, led by Ali Khalifa as the passing big there, almost Jokic light-esque. BYU beats Duquesne. Number 3, I have 314. I have Illinois taking on Morehead State. I have the Fighting Illini moving on. Don't underestimate this Morehead State team, though. They're led by Riley Minix and a couple of great cast characters there. They were the first team this season to clinch a berth into March Madness, which felt like ages ago. Josh and Peyton covered that game in Evansville for the OVC title game. Morehead State's a dominant team, great offense led by, again, Riley Minix, double-double machine. Almost last, 7-10, Washington State Drake. Look, Washington State has a blueprint to beat Drake. They have a defense. They have a zone defense that's really good. They have an incredible coach. They have an incredible player in Miles Rice. The question is this Drake team good enough if they bottle Tucker DeVries up? I think just slightly. The question is, can they bottle Tucker DeVries up? And I don't think that's probably the case. As much as I like Washington State, I like their defense. This is an incredible story. I hope they continue this. I hope this is a building block for this program and Coach Smith. But I have Drake. I have Drake in the DeVries family moving on as the 10 seed. I think they're slightly underseeded, probably a 9, if anything. Last but certainly not least, Iowa State, South Dakota State. South Dakota State led by Zeke Mayo. They absolutely ran through the Summit League. They dominated the top 4 teams in there. I picked the Tommies to make it out of there from St. Thomas. I was obviously wrong on that. But just thinking about what South Dakota State is, Iowa State's defense will suffocate them. And obviously 215, even though it's happened 3 years in a row, I think Iowa State is, again, as I laid out in the seeding stupidity part at the top, Iowa State's a really good team. So I went with Iowa State. So really my only upset in the first round is Drake over Washington State. I think this is the bracket of death. I think the top teams prevail. I don't see much shaking up there in the round of 32, or what will be the round of 32. UConn FAU, round of 32, I have the UConn Huskies moving on. As much as I like this FAU team, I think UConn is built as a national champion contender. Not a spoiler. I think that's obvious. They're the number 1 overall seed, as we'll get to. You'll see my thoughts on them as we get moving. But UConn FAU, I have UConn in the round of 32, moving on to make the Sweet 16. Round 2, I think this is interesting. I think the San Diego State team, I have them taking on Auburn in the 4-5, round of 32. I think this is an incredible round of 32 game. That's probably Sweet 16 or Elite 8 caliber type of matchup. This is kind of funny that UConn, FAU, and San Diego State got ranked or got placed 1, 2, and 3 right on top of each other, basically a 1, 8, and a 5, where they would have to play each other, basically a collision course to get there. To get to the Sweet 16. San Diego State's got to get through Auburn first, even though I think Jaden Ledee is an incredible player, and he's the kind of guy that can force this team into a win. I know they're better than just Jaden Ledee, but he's the kind of guy that can take over and completely give you just a nice March Madness run, Sweet 16 kind of deal, minimum. I do think Auburn's the better team. Auburn's the more experienced team. I'm going to give it to Auburn. I say more experienced in the fact that they're a little bit older. They have some guys that have been around moments, bigger, better, even though San Diego State does return a lot of the guys from last year. I don't want that to be understated. They have championship experience, of course. They were in the championship game against UConn and put up a decent fight early on. But I do have San Diego State losing to Auburn. Auburn making the Sweet 16 to set us up for a really great matchup there. BYU, Illinois, as much as I love this BYU team, I've been on Illinois most of the year, and then they decided to stop playing defense basically throughout the month of January and into early February. Then they turned it around, got the stops that they needed late February, early March. They ended up winning the Big Ten just an hour before Selection Sunday or less. There, I think the team's incredible. Damascus stepped up where he can be a playmaker and he can be a scorer. Terrence Shannon's unstoppable. They're obviously going to have to get Coleman Hawkins to be locked in on both ends of the floor and not make mistakes, which is a really hard thing to ask, but I think the talent does elevate this team into the Sweet 16.
Hey, do you love 90s movies?
Well, we've got just the right podcast for you.
Hey, I'm Jordan.
And this is Nick.
And we host Film Shake, the 90s Movies podcast.
We cover everything 90s, from the terrible to the awesome.
Giant snakes, worlds underwater, and Jean-Claude Van Damme with a mullet? Check.
Underrated or forgotten movie gems? We got you covered there too.
Listen as we cover one 90s movie at a time and top it off with an epic trivia battle where the loser gets punished with a terrible movie to watch, usually me.
Go to filmshakepodcast.com to check out all our episodes.
And long live the 90s.
Washington State I had losing to Drake, which means I have a Drake-Iowa State round of 32. As much as I think this game will be the best atmosphere in the entire tournament pre-Elite Eight because of where it is. It's going to be in Omaha, which means we're not that far from Drake. We're not that far from Iowa State. This is going to be an Iowa State Cyclone crowd, and I think that is probably the difference maker, the defense on DeVries. If Washington State couldn't do it, Iowa State definitely can, which means I'm going to take Iowa State to make the Sweet 16, which I know, boring, means I have the 1 seed, a 4 seed, the 3, and I have the 2. So I have all of the highest seeds moving on. But again, bracket of death. This should not surprise you. These teams combined for less than 20 total KenPom rankings, which means this is the most talented bracket of them all. So to set up the Sweet 16, to put us into the Elite 8, I have UConn taking on Auburn. This is where I think UConn's experience and UConn's just dominance this season from a both sides of the floor standpoint. I really think this steps up. I think they have the offense and the shooting from Cam Spencer and Alex Caravan to be able to beat Auburn at their own game a little bit. Auburn does, I think, relatively take care of the ball. So UConn, I think, beats Auburn. I think Dan Hurley is the best coach in the country right now, and as much as I love Bruce Pearl, Dan Hurley's got the advantage. Illinois, Iowa State in the Sweet 16 to go on to the Elite 8. I have Illinois. I think Illinois' offense is too much for Iowa State's defense. I think if that game gets close, Iowa State may not have the offense to keep up a little bit there. I know that that's not the game that they want to win from that side of the ball, but I think this is where Illinois' foot kind of puts down. They'll get the stops that they need late in the game if that's what it ends up being. They're a very active team on defense, at least from a gaining deflection standpoint. So I think that is a big enough difference maker that Illinois will take on UConn in the Elite 8. And then, like I just said, Illinois, UConn in the Elite 8. I have the Huskies ultimately having the defensive stalwart. Again, a lot of this is based on if Klingon is healthy. If Klingon's healthy, like we saw in the Big East Championship game, he'll have a dominant performance against a team like Illinois where he'll be able to beat Coleman Hawkins, especially in the post. Obviously, they'll have to figure out ways to switch a defender as Coleman Hawkins can stretch the floor, which I think the matchups start to get really interesting there. Illinois' offense, obviously, we know can turn on the Jets at any time and just put up a ridiculous amount of points on you in a hurry. The thing I'm thinking about, though, is the fact that UConn, if they control the pace of the game with a guy like Tristan Newton, which I know they can, Stephon Castle is an X factor for them, I think they'll ultimately have the pedigree and the talent and the coaching that will get them over the edge, and I just don't see this Illinois team being the team that slays them. I think they would have a bigger problem with Auburn or Iowa State potentially, but I think the way the bracket opens up and falls into UConn's lap a little bit there, as much as I don't feel like that's a knock on Illinois, it's just more of a, hey, I think UConn is just better than almost every team in this bracket, despite the strength of it. I have the Huskies making the Final Four in back-to-back seasons and having a chance at making the national championship game. All right, we're going to move on to the South region. The South region features Houston as the number 1 overall seed, as you'll see along the ticker at the bottom. Sorry about not being able to do the graphics as much. I'll definitely post my full bracket paper filled out on Twitter whenever it's over when this podcast goes out. But Houston takes on Longwood. I will say, if there is a 16 that's going to be a 1, if it's going to happen, this is actually the one. Longwood controls the tempo of games really, really well. Their defense is incredible. We've seen the variance. Carl from Jim Range did a really great TikTok the other day about this, where the 216 seeds that have won so far was teams that play a slower pace. Purdue and Virginia were very low in that at the time when they lost. Teams control the possessions. If the lower seeded team just has to make some extra threes on those possessions, which even though Longwood isn't an incredible 3-point shooting team to my knowledge, I'll have to double check. But look, at the end of the day, if Houston is the grinded out type of team and Longwood sticks with them, they have a guy like D.A. Houston, no pun intended, to be able to get that win. So not saying it happens. I think Houston's an incredible team. Shed and Cryer will change any game, but 1 versus 16 of all of them, this is the one that I think would be the most interesting. I could see it being a 4-point game in the 40s with like 8 minutes left or something like that, and then Houston pulls away and wins by like 15. So Houston Longwood, I have the Houston Cougars moving on. Nebraska, Texas A&M. This was the hardest game of the entire tournament for me. As crazy as that sounds, I picked Nebraska about 40 seconds ago. I ultimately think Nebraska's defense ends up being a little bit better. Their defense is 30th in KenPom. A&M's defense is 57th. Offenses are very similar. They're 5 points off in offense. The possession length is Nebraska's advantage there. Nebraska can get more shots up quicker. The effective field goal percentage offense for Texas A&M is almost dead last in the country, while Nebraska's is top 62 in the country at 62. So both take care of the ball pretty well. At the end of the day, I think Nebraska's just the better offense. I think Nebraska's the better team. Tominaga can obviously go off from three. We've seen games this year where he had like a ridiculous amount of threes and help win those Big Ten games. The problem is A&M has Wade Taylor. So I'm picking against the best player on the floor, which is normally, as you guys know, especially in the NBA, is kind of against my own rules. But Nebraska is incredible the more I look at them, and I think they're kind of underseeded. So I went with Nebraska at the literal last second. Wisconsin, James Madison. I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid off. I think James Madison wins this game. I know this is the pretty everyone's Cinderella pick. It'll probably be the most picked 12 out of them all. But listen, this James Madison team, I really wish I had the opportunity to go see them this year. I had a few chances. I couldn't pull it off. But they are a 30-win team for a reason. They're incredible on both sides of the ball. They're led by TJ Bickerstaff. That is going to be a team that is going to give whoever they play problems, and obviously that starts with Wisconsin in the first round. Wisconsin hasn't obviously been playing their best basketball in the last 2 months. They started off the season incredibly well. They were a top 10 team for most of that part of the year, and then obviously finished Big Ten play very, very poorly. Turned it on in the tournament, made the finals. So they've got some confidence at least, which I think will help them. But James Madison, I think, is deeper, better offensive team. And if Wisconsin can obviously grind it out a little bit, I think this game changes. But I'm going to pick James Madison, regardless of what the American public thinks. Look, I think this was a pick I was going to make the entire time. 4-13. The Duke Blue Devils take on the Vermont Catamounts. I don't want to be dismissive of Vermont, but I don't think this is the team that takes down Duke. If it was James Madison, I would tell you otherwise. Even if it was, there's a handful of other teams in this bracket that I think could have taken down Duke if they had gotten that pull. But Duke is the 4 seed. I think even though they're not playing their best basketball the last month or so, I do think that this team is still ultimately just more talented, better coaching, as much as I love Coach Becker up at Vermont. But I think Duke is the better team. I'll go with Duke. Texas Tech, NC State. This is not the homer pick for me that you're probably, you are expecting it. I do think NC State will beat Texas Tech. I do think NC State is the better team from a consistent standpoint right now, from a consistency, the way they're playing. The guard play has been incredible. Texas Tech obviously is led by Grant McCasland, one of the best defensive coaches in the country, which I think obviously ultimately is a big difference maker there. But NC State's the hottest team in the country. I don't think they have a perfect matchup for DJ Burns, so I think the state can continue to do what they did for 5 games and 5 nights at the ACC tournament, and I think that they beat Texas Tech. Find out how far the run goes after that. Kentucky, Oakland. I laid out a really great case yesterday on ECB show just to mess with Josh, how Oakland can beat Kentucky. I don't think it actually happens, but Trey Townsend's an incredible player for Oakland. Oakland had some insane games earlier this year against some insane competition, and they held a lot of them close here. Pulling up the Oakland schedule now. So obviously I mentioned Trey Townsend. Oakland's offense is really good. It's top 135 in almost every KenPom category, top 100 in a lot of major ones like effective field goal percentage, free throw percentage, block percentage. They're an offensive team. Problem is they're playing probably the best offensive team in the entire tournament. Some of their results against notable teams, they finished 23-11, the best team in the horizon there. Ohio State 79-73 loss for Oakland. Illinois, another tournament team here, 64-53, right? The Drake 85-77. Xavier, they beat Xavier 78-76 at Xavier this year, which is an incredible win, despite what Xavier turned into. And then Dayton, 91-67, not exactly as close. And then for conference play, like I said, they only had a few blips here and there against Green Bay, Northern Kentucky, and Wright State. They're on a pretty consistent winning streak now, ever since that tournament. So, I do think this game will be interesting. Don't be surprised if it's like a close game in the second half, but then Kentucky just absolutely just lights it up from 3 the final 12 minutes of the second half, and they win the game. They're ultimately the better team, the more talented team. This is not an upset I see happening, but second half could be close. So I'll go with Kentucky there against the 14 seed Oakland. Florida and Boise State, Colorado. This is despite what I think about Boise State, I think Colorado matches up incredibly well with them. I think Colorado's guard play, they'll have three of the best players on the floor other than Tyson Dagenhart for Boise State. I think Colorado with Simpson and Williams and even De Silva and Lampkin, I think it's just a really strong four core there. And I think Colorado makes it out of Dayton as the 10. And they play Florida in the first round. So I have Colorado winning, and this is going to be posted, I think, just before the first four games on Tuesday night. So just keep that in mind. Obviously, I'm recording this in the morning of Tuesday, so we won't. I don't know the results as of right now. But my Colorado team, my pick is Colorado to come out of the first four for the Boise State matchup and the 10 seed, and then they play Florida. And I have Colorado beating Florida without Micah, and I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name, who's a really incredible offensive rebounder for them. He unfortunately had, I believe, an ankle fracture or snap or something like that. It was nasty. Had surgery the other day. I think Florida obviously is an incredible team. I think they're probably better than the 7 seed would suggest, especially based on recent play. But I think Colorado is a team that is hungry. I think a team that is more talented than might be perceived. They got into the tournament maybe a little bit lucky on that end of things, but ultimately I think that they have the right matchup for this. I think if they drew a lot of other teams around that 7 line, they probably don't beat them. But also 10 of the last 11 years, a first 4 team has won a game in March Madness, has won a game in the big tournament as well, which means that Colorado can do it. The historical data says they might, and I picked them to do so. So I have Florida losing to Colorado in the round of 64. Lastly, Marquette, Western Kentucky. If there was ever a 15 seed that could be the 2, it would be a 2 seed that is missing or has its best player, but he's harboring an injury. According to reports, Tyler Kolek for Marquette is no longer in pain, but it's an injury that is re-aggravatable very easily, an oblique injury, something you have to be very careful with. It obviously has had plenty of time off since the Big East tournament began, to where he hasn't been on the floor and hasn't been able to had to worry about the injury there. Western Kentucky plays an incredible offensive style of play. They are a team that you just absolutely do not want to see if you're having a bad shooting night. They are going to be a team that, despite what a lot of the projections might say for the matchup, I think Western Kentucky's offense and pace of play will help them. They're the fastest team in the country in adjusted tempo. Their defense is actually a lot better, and I think people realize their defense is better than their offense. They're 103rd in the country in KenPom, which is a very, very respectable mark. Almost every single defensive metric, they're in the top 100 for KenPom, but their offense is what they're more known for, at least from a offensive. From a one side or the other side of the ball standpoint. Last couple of scores results, they beat UTEP in the championship game of the Conference USA tournament 78-71, but then before that 85, 89, 79, 83, 84, 72. That was a little losing streak there. They ended the regular season with a 4-game losing streak in Conference USA play, but then right before that they rattled off a 72-point win, 72 points in the win, let me be clear, 90, 70, 81, 88. So they can change and adapt their style of play the way they want to. And I think that might give Marquette some trouble. Don't be surprised that this is one of the closest, if not the closest, 2 versus 15s in the tournament. All right. So that has I have Houston taking on Nebraska in the round of 32. As much as I would be so happy for Nebraska ball and Tominaga and Coach Hoiberg there getting their first ever win. Let me just make that abundantly clear. First ever win in the Power 6 as a Power 6 team in March Madness for them. I have Houston beating Nebraska as the 1 versus the 8. James Madison, I have beating Wisconsin, so I have them taking on Duke in a 12-4 second round. I have James Madison beating Duke. I think this Duke team is not playing its best basketball, like I said, as of late, coming off of a loss in the ACC tournament to NC State. The guard play is inconsistent. As much as I love Tyrese Proctor, potentially as a long-term NBA prospect, Jeremy Roach can't completely carry this Duke team. I think Jared McCain obviously could have a really big game and could change the tides for Duke there. I think JMU is the better front court. I think JMU has the more consistent backcourt, and I'm going to go with the Dukes, who are one of the hottest teams in the country, led by an incredible coaching staff and an incredible story, nonetheless. They're top 100 in both KenPom offense and defense. Moving on there, I have Kentucky and NC State taking on each other. I would love this. Josh and I would love to do a watch party together. But I, unfortunately, as much as I think the NC State Magic would be awesome, I think Kentucky's the better offensive team. I think they'll shoot them out of the building. They won't have an answer for DJ Burns once again. I think that he will consistently be this team's X factor if they continue to make a March Madness run. Eric Haslam yesterday of HaslamMetrics.com laid out an incredible case for NC State to be an Elite Eight team, and I couldn't believe it. So just something to think about there. Look, Kentucky's an incredible team. They just have to figure out how to string together defensive stops in a consistent, in each segment or in each, what do you call the little breaks in the 4-minute segments, whatever. I call them segments, but, whatever. At the end of the day, you get what I'm saying. Kentucky is going to be able to be a team that gets it done. The coaching scares me a little bit, but against NC State, I don't think that's a problem. In the second round, I have Colorado taking on Marquette. As much as I love this Colorado team from a talent standpoint at the top, I think Marquette is better. I think ultimately, if by that point Tyler Kolek is fully healthy, I think that they will make the Sweet 16 against Colorado. So in the Sweet 16 of the South, I have Houston taking on James Madison. Unfortunately, I think this is where the Duke's run comes to an end. This would be a game that Jamal Shead or LJ Cryer or both completely take over and get this team to a win. I think the front court there with Francis as well is a huge difference maker against JMU. Houston's more physical. They'll have the team to match JMU from a defensive standpoint, and I think the Cougars make the Elite Eight. And the Sweet 16, I have Kentucky taking on Marquette. The history would tell you that Marquette beats Kentucky. They beat them sometime in the 90s when they've matched up against each other. In 2003, Dwayne Wade had a triple-double to take out Kentucky in the March Madness tournament. And then in the 2000s, late 2000s there, a Jimmy Butler-led team beat Kentucky in the first round. So history would tell you that to pick Marquette. I'm telling you to pick Kentucky, and that's what I'm doing as well. Kentucky, I think, beats Marquette of offensive firepower. Again, if Kentucky has a bad shooting night, can they still win those games? Absolutely, right? Someone's always going to step up, right? When you have this many good players, even like a Justin Edwards game we're going to get from the last couple of weeks. He had a couple of great games. Antonio Reeves, you've heard my thoughts many times on different shows, and this one included. I think he can kill them in games sometimes with the shot chucking and some of the early shot clock decisions, but they have the team to figure it out. Reed Shepard's an incredible connecting piece who can obviously go off in his own right. He had a 30-point game earlier this year. So, again, somebody's always going to step up. Rob Dillingham as well. I think Kentucky beats Marquette to make the Elite Eight. All right. In the Elite Eight, Houston, Kentucky, I have the Cougars continuing to be defensive stalwart giant. I think they take down Kentucky, and I think they make the Final Four. Despite some of the injuries, I think this is a team that is tested for those injuries. I saw them early on in the season. This year in Charleston, they beat Dayton pretty handedly in what felt like a Dayton home game there in Charleston for a neutral site game in the Charleston Classic. They beat every other team before that, Utah. Like, they just handle these teams. They just absolutely find a way. I know Kentucky's a better team than those that I just mentioned, but this is a Houston team that I think teams are honestly going to underrate a little bit, and I think they're Final Four caliber team. Whether they can win a championship, we'll discuss that in a minute. So I have UConn in the East so far, and I have the Houston Cougars going to the Final Four in the South. All right. As you can see, we're going to move on to the Midwest here. Purdue takes on the winner of Montana State and Grambling. I think Montana State as the 16 beats Grambling in Dayton. And then I have Purdue beating, despite last year's result, I have Purdue beating Montana State. All right. In the 8-9, I have Utah State defeating TCU. I think this is a ridiculously underseeded Utah State team. Their backcourt is incredible, led by Darius Brown, Ian Martinez there. Great Osborne obviously is a great player as well. But look, TCU is Jameer Nelson Jr. and Emmanuel Miller. I get that, right? But the difference is Utah State's defense. Utah State holds their opponents to just 29% from three. They're third in the country in that metric, and TCU's offense from three is 87th in the country, so I think that is a big difference maker there. Utah State scores the ball incredibly efficiently on offense. They're 57% from two and 12th in the country in that category. I think ultimately Utah State's the better team. I think they're the seeded team, and I think they're the better coach team with Coach Sprinkle there. So I have Utah State beating TCU to take on Purdue in the round of 32. This bracket got really nasty really fast with a bunch of these upsets. Again, Gonzaga, I think, slightly overseeded, but we know that is because of BYU being a 6 and not being able to play on Sunday. So Gonzaga, McNeese, I have McNeese winning. I think this Will Wade led team is an incredible team led by Shahada Wells. They're an incredible offensive team. They know how to stop you on defense. They play on both sides of the ball incredibly well, and I think they match up really well against a not-so-deep Gonzaga team, and I think that they'll be able to get that. Obviously, Mark Few is one of the best coaches in the country, especially now that he's in the tournament, but I think Will Wade puts his team on the map and probably gets himself a coaching job very shortly down the road. Kansas, Stanford. Look, at the end of the day, if Kansas is not healthy, Stanford's going to win this game. They're going to out-offense them. They're going to outscore the ball of Kansas. They're going to be able to run up and down. Bucky Ball is incredible, and I think it makes for a really strong upset team. Not necessarily as deep, probably, but I think Stanford can beat Kansas, and I think they will. I have two seeds of the higher double digit there playing each other in the round of 32. I have McNeese and Stanford taking on each other as a 12-13. Number 6, South Carolina. Number 11, Oregon. I have South Carolina. This is definitely a lucky team, according to KenPom. But I think South Carolina is a deeper team right now. Obviously, unexpected result for them, obviously based on what they were projected. Dead last in the SEC, I believe, or second to last. Oregon, not very deep team. Again, something to think about there. Healthy guys, departing from the program, whatever it is. But Dana Altman in the tournament is a really dangerous coach. He's made the Sweet 16 almost every time, I believe, he's been in the tournament. South Carolina, I just went with as the just team that went through a better schedule. I think the SEC grind helped them prepare them for a March Madness tournament. So I went with South Carolina in a very close game, even though I think Oregon will give them a fight. And Fale Dante is the best player on the floor in that game, probably. 3 Creighton, 14 Akron. As much as I love the Zips, and I think if they drew anybody but Creighton, I'd probably think harder about picking them. I think Creighton is the better team. Consistently, Kalkbrenner will be able to defend the paint against a lot of the Akron attack. I went with Creighton. Texas against the winner of Virginia and Colorado State in Dayton. I have Colorado State. Isaiah Stevens will take over that Virginia game, I think. Unfortunately, I don't think either team has the potential to beat Texas consistently. As much as I would love Colorado State in the Mountain West to put a big middle finger to the committee, I do have Colorado State losing to Texas as a 7-10 after Colorado State wins in Dayton. I have Texas moving on to the round of 32. Lastly, Tennessee probably should be a little bit at least nervous that St. Peter's is on the other end of this, but this is not the same St. Peter's team from a few years ago that made a miraculous Elite Eight run or whatever it ended up being. I think it was Sweet 16 Elite Eight. Texas, Tennessee, this is the Rick Barnes showdown, as we could probably famously call this. Tennessee's one of the best teams in the country, one of the best teams in this tournament. I have Tennessee beating Texas pretty comfortably to make the Sweet 16. I went a little bit ahead of myself there. Tennessee beating St. Peter's, but yes, I have Texas beating Tennessee, as we'll go back up to the top. So Purdue, Utah State in the 1 versus the 8. I have the Boilermakers taking down Utah State. I do think this is a Utah State team that is poised and built to beat Purdue. Do I think they have enough guys they can throw at Zach Edey? No. I do think the idea of Great Osibor playing on him for 40 minutes is awesome. I just don't know if Osibor gets into foul trouble, if Utah State has an answer there. But they do they do pass the ball really well, Utah State does. Darius Brown's one of the best, if not the best, I believe, at one point, assist-to-turnover ratio guys in the country. So just something to think about there for a potential. I know a lot of people are picking TCU because of the style difference against Purdue, but I think if there's a team from the 8-9 that can do that, I think it's Utah State. But ultimately, I think the Boilermakers are poised to continue to move on. Like I alluded to, 12 versus 13 in the round of 32, definitely the most interesting draw here. This Will Wade-led team in McNeese is incredible, right? To go from a sub-500 team last year to a almost, I believe, 30-win team and make the March Madness tournament is a testament to how incredible of a coach Will Wade is. And I think the Samford buckyball style of offense is something that McNeese has the talent and the depth to prepare to stop. And I think McNeese makes the Sweet 16. All right, and then in the second round, I have the 6-seeded South Carolina Gamecocks taking on the 3-seeded Creighton Blue Jays. I think this team, the Kalkbrenner defense in the paint, will keep South Carolina. Obviously, not a very efficient offense for South Carolina, so getting into the paint and getting consistent shots at the rim will be really difficult. I think that's ultimately the difference maker. Obviously, Ashworth can go off and have a 40% three-point shooting night anytime he wants. Shireman can take over any game. And I think Trey Alexander's an incredible point guard, incredible leader, incredible player. People say he's more of a wing. I think he can definitely be a guard that gives you a lot of problems in this tournament, despite what he is as a defender from the wing spot. And then, like I accidentally slipped up and said Texas, Tennessee. I have Tennessee handling Texas pretty easily in the round of 32. So on to the Sweet 16. Back at the top, I have Purdue taking on McNeese. I think Purdue, even though McNeese would make this game really fun and really interesting. And I'm not just picking McNeese because the entire country is. I felt like this is a really strong Will Wade-led team all year. I'm picking Purdue to make it to the Elite Eight. Creighton, Tennessee, I think this would be really fun. I think this would be an incredible game. This probably would be one of the best games in the Sweet 16. I do have Tennessee. This is a team that is built to make a run in March now. Rick Barnes has an incredible defensive team, as he always does. They have a really deep front court. I think that really ultimately is the difference against Creighton. Obviously, having Dalton Connect versus not having Dalton Connect is a huge difference maker for Tennessee, and I think he carries them throughout this tournament. That sets up an Elite Eight matchup between Purdue and Tennessee, and I have Tennessee taking down the Boilermakers again. The defense, I think the guards are more experienced on Tennessee's side of things going up against Purdue's guards. I think this is where that ends up mattering. Again, front court that is deep to be able to attack Zach Edey. Tennessee, if they really don't get into foul trouble, but if they do, they have the depth to be able to figure it out. And then they have guys like Zakai Ziegler, who are just experienced point guards that have been in these moments before, who have won big games all season, specifically calling back to the Tennessee game against Kentucky. I think this Tennessee team is incredible, and I think that they make a run to the Final Four as the 2 seed, taking down the Boilermakers, which will then put some really big spotlights and eyes on Matt Painter not making the Final Four once again or ever under Zach Edey or with Zach Edey. All right, lastly, we move on to the West region, where we see North Carolina be the number 1 overall seed in that region, number 1 seed, 4th overall number 1 seed as well. They're going to take on the winner of Howard and Wagner in the Dayton play-in game for the 16 seed. I did go with Howard. Not that it really matters, unfortunately, for the 1 versus the 6. Howard is back to the NCAA tournament after being in there last year, drew Kansas, I believe, last year. And then Howard has a guy named Seth Towns, who I believe was a Buckeye at one point. Harvard, I may be wrong on the Buckeye part of it, but he started college basketball in 2016, and this is his final year of eligibility. Led Howard throughout this season. I have North Carolina moving on against Howard in the 1 seed versus 16 seed. Second, Mississippi State, Michigan State. I do, like I said at the top, argued a little bit against Michigan State being the 9. I went with Chris Jan's, incredible defense, led by Josh Hubbard, who's a 5'10 freshman scorer for them, and Tolu Smith, who I think is the best player in the front court on both ends of the ball in this game. 8 versus 9. Michigan State not exactly able to match up, I think, with the experience in the front court that Mississippi State has. So I have Mississippi State moving on to play North Carolina in the round of 32. The 2 hardest games, I think, in this side of the bracket are next to each other. First one's the St. Mary's Gales against the 12-seeded Grand Canyon team. And look, this was a coin flip for me. I really like Grand Canyon. I actually think they have a really strong chance to beat St. Mary's. I just think St. Mary's experience, the defense, and then Aiden Mahamey can completely change over a game, just like Tyon Grant Foster can for Grand Canyon. The issue is I don't like Grand Canyon's depth, and I think St. Mary's has a little bit of an advantage in that area. Again, slowing the tempo of the game down, controlling it. I think if Grand Canyon was the flipped team playing Alabama as the 4 versus the 13, contrary to what we see here, I think they can get it done. So, unfortunately for Grand Canyon, it's more of a matchup thought. I do really like St. Mary's. I do really like Grand Canyon as well, and I went with ultimately St. Mary's. I think this game will be very, very close and come down to the wire. And then the 4-13, we have Charleston at the 13 taking on the 4-seed Alabama. Look, this Alabama team's defense is just not good. They've given up 100 points to Florida, I think, twice in the last 3 weeks. Just in general, I'm not as big of a fan of this Alabama team as everyone else is. I think the offense is incredible. I think Nate Oates is a great coach in that regard. They have to prove it to me that they can make a run in March Madness with a team that isn't led by, last year obviously having Brendan Miller. I'm not sold on this Alabama team. I think they've sweltered in some competition in the SEC. And this is a Charleston team I got to see multiple times this year in both a loss and in a victory in 2 different settings. On the road at Trask Coliseum against UNCW in a loss, and then in the CAA championship, and they ultimately ended up winning that after I left. So I think this Charleston team is really, really deep. I think it's going to be a problem for Alabama. Obviously, Alabama's got the better athletes. Obviously, both these teams are incredible scoring teams, but I believe in Coach Kelsey, and I believe in the Cougars and what they're going to be able to do. Obviously, if this is a shootout, Alabama has a small advantage in that regard. I think these teams are a lot closer offensively than people might realize. The argument's going to be is Charleston's defense going to be good enough, and I think in a tournament setting, things aren't exactly the way we might expect them all the time, and I think this game actually is a lot closer than people think, and I did go with Charleston. I think one of these 2 teams is going to be an upset, so I went with the team I was more confident in, and that's the Charleston Cougars. I have them taking on St. Mary's in the run of 32. This next one, 6 seed Clemson, I think it just got the worst possible draw, and they got the 11 seeded New Mexico. I'll get this out of the way and rip the Band-Aid off. I have New Mexico moving on. I have them beating Clemson. This is not an 11 seed team. This is a team that is very, very, very good, better than 11. They've Donovan Dent, Jalen House, Jamal Mashburn. I mean, they have an incredible backcourt. Not only do they have that, they have a front court with Nelly Jr. Joseph, an incredible coach. I think this team is loaded, and I think this team is loaded and ready to make a run. Number 3, Baylor against 14 Colgate. This is actually the opposite. This Colgate team, obviously, Matt Lengel's got an incredible program up there in New York, Hamilton to be exact. And this is a team that historically wants to shoot a lot of threes and wants to get up points quickly. This team actually can do the opposite. This team can slow the game down, win in the 60s, and I think Baylor's too good for that. I think any other year I might be looking at Colgate as the pretty pick like everyone keeps doing, and they haven't got over the edge there. And I do have Baylor in this one as well. Next, near the bottom of this region, I have the 7 seed Dayton taking on Nevada at the 10 seed. Again, I'm going to keep saying it. I think this Nevada team is, I think all of them out west continuing to beat that point up. I think this is just a completely underseeded team. I don't understand how Nevada, who's battle tested in that conference, I just don't get it. I don't get the whole 10 seed thing for them. And as I'm pulling it up here, I think this game's really close. I think this is a game that people are going to look at as like they see Deron Holmes and they're going to be like, well, Deron Holmes, Dayton is projected to win by 1 on KenPom, 72-71. That gives you an idea of how big of a toss-up it really is. Look, Dayton's defense is, I think, something that is probably less valued than I think it's realized. 87th in KenPom. Their opponents, they don't foul their opponents very much at all. Their opponents don't get to the free throw line at all. They have the 18th best offense. They're doing all this without Malachi Smith. They lost really early on in the year. Obviously, they're going to have the best player on the floor more than likely. I know that's probably debatable, but I like the backcourt of this Nevada team. Keenan Blackshear, Gerard Lucas, Trey Coleman even at that smaller forward spot. I think this Nevada team is way better than what they're seated as. And I don't care if it's the Mountain West Homer thing. I think Dayton is not as deep as people would want them to be. Obviously, Santos is an incredible player there at the forward spot for them. They have the star power to win 1, maybe even 2 games. The problem is their opponent more than likely is going to be Arizona in the round of 32. However, I have Nevada taking it. I think the backcourt duo of Blackshear and Lucas, I think help get it done for them. And then lastly, Arizona playing Long Beach State. Not going to get into the inner workings and details of the Long Beach State coaching situation that's going on, but long story short, they fired their coach Monday, and he stayed with the team. They went on to win that conference, and now they're in March Madness. So it's just an incredible story that I feel like only gets better by the day. He also, the coach, Dan Monson, I believe is his name, is also the same coach that gave Tommy Lloyd his GA job at Gonzaga back in the day. So really weird inner workings here. Tommy Lloyd, obviously the coach at Arizona, 2 versus a 15. Really interesting stuff here. I think this is an interesting thing to monitor. I don't think that Long Beach gets it done. Arizona, I believe, makes it to the round of 32 like they were probably hoping to do last year. All right, and back up to the round of 32 in the rest of the West region here. I have the Tar Heels taking on the Mississippi State. I do think that the Mississippi State team is interesting. The front court part, Tolu Smith playing on Armando Bacot. I think UNC's deeper. I think they're the better backcourt. I think this game won't be that close, but Mississippi State definitely has some great talent. Like I've mentioned before, I have the Tar Heels moving on to the Sweet 16. St. Mary's is the 5 seed I have playing against the 13-seeded Charleston Cougars. And this is where I have some doubts and thoughts about St. Mary's that I feel like, again, if these teams were flopped and Charleston was playing them in the first round, that I feel like Charleston could exploit. I have these two taking on each other in the second round, and I think Charleston wins it. Again, I think the depth is super important for Charleston, the three-point shooting variance, and just the ability to get up shots in a quality amount of ways. I've seen Charleston in multiple different facets. Like I said, also saw them win by 30 on the road against Campbell as well. So just I've seen variances of Charleston that I really like, and I think if their defense can lock in here in the next 2 rounds, I do think this team can make the Sweet 16 and redeem themselves for not getting over the hump against San Diego State last year, unfortunately. Next, I have the 11-seeded New Mexico Lobos, I think is right off the top of my head. I wish I had wrote that down. Baylor facing them. I think Baylor is really good. I like the backcourt, but I like New Mexico's backcourt even more, and I think New Mexico matches up really well with Baylor. I think they're a deeper team than Baylor as well. They have the physicality. They have the the championship level DNA. Obviously, Scott Drew, I'm betting against Scott Drew here a little bit, but I think this Baylor team isn't the typical Baylor team that we would typically see, even though I do like some of their pieces. And I have New Mexico making the Sweet 16 as an 11 seed when, again, probably shouldn't be seeded that way. Lastly, I have Nevada and Arizona. I think Arizona-Nevada is an awesome backcourt matchup, again, with Blackshear and Lucas, but also, Caleb Love, Colin Boswell. Like, this is going to be an incredible, explosive game. I, unfortunately, for Nevada, do think that Arizona has the better firepower, the really great front court there. I believe in Coach Tommy Lloyd as well. So I think Arizona makes it to the Sweet 16. All right, and in the Sweet 16 now, we have North Carolina taking on Charleston. I think, unfortunately for the Cougars, this is where their run ends, but I do think this would be really good for Pat Kelsey and his team on the national spotlight. UNC has better guards, just as deep of a rotation, incredible front court, so I think this is where Charleston's time comes to an end. And then in the other Sweet 16 matchup in the West, New Mexico, Arizona. I think this New Mexico team matches up with Arizona incredibly well. I think you might even people might call them New Mexico would be Arizona light. But I think New Mexico is talented. I think this is a really good team that I think would be battle-tested to this point. And we've seen Arizona, who obviously plays their own fast tempo style of pace. I think if these two match each other, it just comes down to a close game. And I would take New Mexico, in that matchup. I think Donovan Dent and what he's shown this year. Obviously, we know that on the other side, there's a Caleb Love, Colin Boswell matchup. That is incredible. But I think the guard rotation for New Mexico is what will help ultimately get this job done. Obviously, I'm betting against Arizona there with being the better team, at least seeding-wise, but I'm going to pick New Mexico. I think New Mexico is an incredible team that went through a better conference this year. The Mountain West was a better conference than the Pac-12. I don't think that's a debate. So in the Elite Eight, I have North Carolina taking on New Mexico, and I have the Lobos making the Final Four, right? We haven't had an all number one seed or consistently that high of a seed since 2008. 2008 was a long time ago now, right? So North Carolina, obviously, I think has shown they are beatable. I think an Elite Eight run still shows how good this team really was this year. I think New Mexico gets the best of them. I really do like how good New Mexico's guards are. I continue to harp on that point. But at the end of the day, the New Mexico guard rotation is incredible. And I think that obviously RJ Davis is really good, but a team like NC State showed them they can stop them this year. Syracuse has really good guards with Judah Mintz and oh my God, J.J. Starling. And we saw that Syracuse could beat North Carolina as well. Georgia Tech, even another team with some decent guards. So we've seen North Carolina get beat this year when people are physical with them, which I think the front court of New Mexico that is deep can do. I think that this team can win, and I think this team can make the Final Four with Coach Richard Pitino. So I'm going to pick New Mexico because at the end of the day, I've already went with a 1 seed, a 1 seed, a 2 seed, and now obviously 11 is going to sound ridiculous, but I think it's happened plenty of times before. We can think of examples, at least with a higher seed, not necessarily 11, but I think this New Mexico team is really good, and it would be a really nice middle finger, I would call it, to the committee for not having them as a tournament team when they deserved it, being almost into the teens and net as a team, and obviously being a team that came out of the Mountain West. So I'm going with New Mexico, which as we are getting to the end here of this hour-long podcast, thank you guys for sticking around. That's going to put us in a position where we are going to have the final. So without further ado, my Final Four picks. Really awesome graphic here. Shout out to Peyton. This is the same graphic we used for ECB last night. So a couple of picks may have changed from last night. We didn't go through every pick on the ECB show, but you heard every single pick I'm making today. So you're going to hear the rest as well as we get into it. So same graphic as last night. Thank you to Peyton again. Love the work he's done with our graphics with ECB this year. Helped me out with a lot of stuff as well. At the end of the day, this is my Final Four. UConn, New Mexico facing off East-West. And then South Midwest, I have Houston taking on Tennessee. I have the Huskies making the championship game, as you see on the screen there, taking on Tennessee, who beats Houston. I think that's a physical defensive battle, but I think ultimately the offense of Tennessee has been too consistent this year to think that they can't beat a team like Houston, despite how historic Houston's defense has been. And then on the other side, this is where the magic ends for New Mexico. I think of it kind of like a Texas Tech run from a few years ago, obviously a VCU in the past, a UCLA from our first four-in team. Teams that made the Final Four where we were like, wow, I don't know if we really expected to be there, but ultimately they didn't get to the championship game because once you're there, these are pedigree, battle-tested teams that are experienced, have good coaching, which I think fits the bill for almost all of these teams. Unfortunately for New Mexico, I think they come up short against UConn and Dan Hurley and the Huskies. They are poised and ready to be back into the national championship game where I think they defeat the Tennessee Volunteers. I think this is an incredible run for UConn. This is the best chance we're going to have since 2007, where I think Peyton shared a really great stat last night that since every team that's had a chance to go back-to-back since 2007 after Florida did it. The team that won the national championship didn't make it past the Sweet 16 the following year. This is a UConn team that we know if they can survive the region of death, the East region, I think that they can do it. I think they can get back to the national championship game, and they'll obviously be experienced. They'll have the depth for it. They have an incredible leader in Tristan Newton who made some All-American honors as I'm recording this today and didn't win Big East Player of the Year, which I thought was fascinating. So just stuff to think about there. Really good leader. If Donovan Clay can stay healthy, this team's going to be a buzzsaw, and I think Tennessee will not be able to match up with them consistently. And I think that's it. That is what we have here. UConn versus Tennessee. My final 4 picks, as you'll see also in the ticker below as I'm getting it closed up here. But again, huge shout out to everybody for supporting this episode. Both on YouTube. The last couple of weeks has been awesome on YouTube, so thank you so much. Don't forget to drop a sub, like, and a comment. Let me know your final 4 picks below. Let me know anything you might have thought I was crazy on. I picked a lot of upsets, but on average, for what it's worth, there are 10 upsets a year, and I have in the East in the first round, I'm just going off the first round, I have Drake as my first upset. I have Charleston as my second. I have New Mexico. I have Nevada. That's 4. And then in the other side, in the South, I have JMU, that's 5. NC State, that's 6. I have Colorado, that's 7. And then I have McNeese and Sanford, that's 8 and 9. And then that's it. So I have 9 upsets. 9 upsets out of the 10. 10 is the average, which is a crazy amount. Obviously, I think the 10 is concurrently throughout the rest of the field as well, but still something to think about. I think there's some really incredible teams that are at the mid-major and low-major level, and as I've done all year, I've defended those guys, and I think that they are going to step up to the challenge, specifically some of the ones I laid out here, as I have, of course, a Mountain West team in the Final 4. So one more time, UConn, Houston, Tennessee, New Mexico. UConn defeats Tennessee in the national championship game. I think it's a weird score, something like 81-77, 81-76, something like that. I think it's close. I think it's a close game. I think Tennessee puts up a good fight. I think Rick Barnes exercises a little bit of demons here as a coach that has not made the Final 4. So really incredible stuff from, again, the support level from you guys has been great. If you're on a podcast platform, 5-star rating and review is greatly appreciated. Don't forget one more time that if you're heading to any of these games or anything throughout the rest of the year in the summer as concert season kicks up, use code 2pointers, $20 off your first purchase. Link in the top of the description is SeatGeek.com, takes you into the app. Really great opportunity there. $20 off your first purchase, code 2pointers, TWOPOINTERS. That about wraps it up. Again, appreciate the support on everything the last couple of weeks. One more time, from me and everybody with ECB and House of College Hoops and all the incredible work that people have been putting out, just wanted to say a big thank you. And then if you enjoyed, again, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know your final 4 picks in the comments below, and enjoy the March Madness tournament. This has been the 2 Pointers Podcast. I'm Trevor Everett, and we will see you soon.